Hey Jared, how's it going?
Oh, I'm good. I can hear you eating. What is it?
I'm eating biscuits.
You know, I bet if I click my fingers, I can make them disappear.
What? Out of my hands. I seriously doubt you can do that. What the hell? Where? Where did my Where did my biscuits go?
Mm, th- these are really good.
I didn't sanitize them. Hey everybody, welcome to Lightbox. This is a place where we look at Christian wisdom for Christian teens. I'm Gareth. You can click the subscribe button and hit that bell if you want more videos about Christian wisdom. Do you ever have that feeling when life is so tough that perhaps God doesn't care? Or that he's not there? You know the feeling when your whole world is just caving in. You feel like there's no way out. And it leads you to think maybe God is not as loving as everybody says he is, or you start to think maybe this whole Christian thing is just a hoax. It's not true, it's not real. There is a thought that really helps me, and that is, if I know without a doubt that God really walked the earth, that he really did die and rise again, then I can say without a doubt that he really is there and that he really loves me. Now, if you've just joined us, this is the second part of a 3-part video series on doubt. So last week what we did was we did a video on how do we actually take on doubt. So you can find that in the previous video. This week we're going to be looking at how do we really know that God really walked the earth, and next week we're going to talk about how do we know that God really, really loves us. Whether he actually walked the earth, no one doubts that, and the reason for that is because there is so much evidence to say that Jesus walked the earth. It's not just in the Bible, but there are other people who actually wrote about Jesus. For example, there's a guy called Josephus who wrote a 20-volume, that's 20 books of history on the Jewish people, and he lived at the time of Jesus, and he actually writes about Jesus. There's other people who've written about Jesus. There's a guy called Celsus and Plinius and Tacitus, who also wrote about him. So the next question is, was he really God? Now that's probably the bigger question. Because we could tend to think, maybe he was just a great guy in history. Not God, but, he said some nice things, and maybe he was a helpful guy in history, and perhaps, those guys like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John who wrote about him in the Bible, perhaps they were just clouded a little bit by their religious minds, perhaps they were a little bit deluded, and they got a bit carried away when it came to writing about the parts that sort of made him look like he was God. So the first thing to say about this is that it wasn't just the Bible authors who actually wrote about Jesus as having power. Josephus, who I mentioned earlier, as well as Celsus, who I also mentioned earlier, they also write about Jesus as having power. Josephus, in his 20 volumes that he wrote, it's called The Antiquity of the Jews, and in that he talks about Jesus as being a wonder worker. Celsus writes about Jesus in a more negative sense. He tended to see Jesus as a sorcerer. Secondly, the gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were not stupid people. They weren't religious, deluded people. For example, have a look at Luke. Okay, so history records Luke as being a man who was a doctor. But look at what he says in the first 4 verses of his gospel. Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us, it seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty concerning the things that you have been taught. So you can see in verse 1 that Luke is writing to someone who he calls most excellent. And the person's name is Theophilus. But that most excellent part is what I want us to look at. Because in those times, most excellent was given to somebody who was with power. Someone who had a high status in society. In other words, someone who you didn't want to mess with. Someone who you didn't want to try lie to because you could face pretty hectic consequences if you did. So if Luke was going to write, he would have to make sure that he got his facts right. Second thing I want you to note is that in verse 1, Luke also says that other people have written accounts. Now, why would Luke write an account if other people have already written it? Well, it tells us in the passage. He wanted to investigate things for himself. In other words, he's not a guy who just takes things at face value. He doesn't just read it and go, okay, I accept it. No, he's an inquisitive mind. He wants to know more. He cannot just accept the truth as it is. He has to go and investigate it. This shows us something more about Luke's personality. He's not an idiot. He's not a fool. He's not a deluded religious person. So Luke is not just some religious nut whose judgment is clouded. He's a man of science because he's a doctor. And he knows his stuff because he researches properly. And so if someone could get in trouble if he said the wrong thing, is not stupid, and actually works quite hard to get the details right, then we've got to admit that maybe, just maybe, this Luke's gospel is telling us the truth. And when you read the rest of Luke's gospel, you see multiple times where Luke writes about Jesus showing himself to be God. One of them is in Luke 5, where Jesus forgives the sins of a paralyzed man. Now, when he forgives the sins of this man, the leaders of the day don't trust him because only God can forgive sins. And so to prove that Jesus is God, Jesus literally takes creation and reshapes it before their very eyes. And he does it by speaking, something which only God can do. What Jesus does is he speaks, and by speaking, he takes hold of creation and he reverses the effects of sin on this poor paralyzed man. And when he does that, he proves to the people who are watching that he is God. And when he proves that he's God, then he proves to them that he actually has the power to forgive sin. And there are other places in Luke's gospel where the author actually shows that this guy Jesus has authority over heaven and earth, proving that he's God. His power over the heavenly realms, if you look in Luke 4 and 8, where he has authority over demons, he basically tells demons to leave people and they just go. He speaks and demons listen. In Luke chapter 7, he heals someone who is miles off just by speaking. He's not even in the same room as the person. He's kilometers away and he speaks and this person is healed. In Luke chapter 7, again, he raises someone who has been dead back to life. In Luke 8, he calms a storm just by speaking, showing that he has control over creation with just words, exactly like Genesis 1. And in Luke 9, you can see he has control over time and space because he predicts his death to the letter. So something you've got to ask yourself is, if this gospel writer is not an idiot, he's not deluded, then perhaps maybe he's onto something. John, Matthew, Luke, Mark, the other gospel writers, they all wrote similar things. And they're all not stupid either, because if you think about it, if their accounts are similar to Luke's, then they're not stupid either. Think about this, if you write an assignment, maybe you have to do a review of a book for school. Not a review, a summary of a book for school. And your friend has written a different summary of that same book to you, then either you haven't done the work, or he hasn't done the work, or she hasn't done the work. Whereas if your summaries are similar, it means you've been reading from the same book. And it's the same with Luke. If Luke's done all the work, and he's talked about this guy called Jesus, then the other accounts would have to be similar as well. Otherwise, either somebody's making a mistake or somebody's lying. So I've been bashing your head with some of these things, but I really wanted you to see that Jesus really was God and he really walked the earth. And if you still doubt what I'm saying, I want you to try this. Try and disprove that Jesus really was God. Because you'll find that that's impossible. When you do find it's impossible, then you have to admit that Jesus really is God. And the reason why this is such an important thing and so profound, and I want to move from your head now to your heart, is because there are going to be times where you are going to seriously wonder if this Christianity thing is actually just a fallacy, just fake. Especially when you're suffering, or when your friends are challenging you at school, or when you are approached with different ways of thinking about the world, or different kinds of views. You're going to go, is this Jesus thing really real? Should I really be following this thing? And when that happens, this is the glorious thing, is that you can look back in history and you can be like, no, without a doubt, God walked the earth. And if he did, then what he says about himself is the truth. It's not a doubt in my mind. So that's it for this video. Next week we're going to be looking at doubting God's love. Jared! And he didn't even leave me any. Oh, man.